Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Laurel Iverson. I'm the Development and Donor Relations Lead at Los Altos Community Foundation. And I'm so thrilled you're all here today and want to welcome you to the first in our series of community conversations. This one, Investing with Purpose in Our Community. Just a couple things. One disclaimer, we are recording this session. So if you would rather not have yourself on the recording, please turn your video off so that will not be captured. We think we will put this just on our website pretty much. I don't think it's going to be going, super far and wide, but just to let you know. And let's see. So without further ado, I'd like to get our program started and introduce Vivian Hsu. Vivian is a Los Altos Community Foundation board member, and she's also our development committee chair. And Vivian is the founder and CEO of Lend Donate. So Vivian, why don't you take it from here?
Thank you, Laurel. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the LACF Community Conversations. Investing with Purpose in Our Community. I'm so excited you can join us today and hear from Adin Miller, our Executive Director, in just a minute. My family and I have lived in Los Altos for 18 years, and longer than any other place I've lived. I moved here because I was working in Mountain View and have enjoyed being part of this greater community ever since. Well, this year we have certainly been put through the test starting in March when sheltering in place began. On an individual level, neighbors came together to try to quickly assess community needs and ways to deploy resources. Teens offered to deliver groceries to seniors, and neighbors picked up donated PPEs for critical workers. All of you, though, took an extra step. You also made donations to enable quick deployment of critical funds through LACF, and as you will hear from Adin, you made a huge impact. So let me tell you who is in this by invitation Zoom room today. There are over 60 of you. Some of you, of course, are sharing a screen. And you're from Los Altos, Los Altos Hills, Mountain View, and also Sunnyvale, East Bay, Lake Tahoe, and Tennessee. Not virtual background, but actually from there. So welcome. You guys are also Legacy Circle members, donor advised fund owners, foundation partners, new and major donors to LACF's Community Impact and Pandemic Response Funds. We hope to someday bring you all into a physical room together, but for now, we're gonna settle for this virtual house party. But today, I also want to especially thank the sponsors who are making this happen. Our premier sponsor, El Camino Health, our sustaining sponsors, Wealth Architects, Young Craig and Company, Cal Water and Thwaites Law, event sponsors, Starlight Caregivers and Present, who provided the delicious pre-webinar event boxes. And as donors, please help us thank them as well. At the end of today's webinar, we will post a link to a short survey that we hope you will participate. Completed surveys will be entered into a drawing for $500 grants that the lucky winner can bestow upon your favorite local nonprofit. So be sure to stay tuned till the end. We want this to be as much of a dialogue as possible, despite our lack of physical distance or whatever, but separated by a screen. So while Adin has a content-filled presentation to share with you, please use the chat box to submit questions anytime. We will break for questions every now and then, and we'll have time at the end to do so. If we cannot get to all of your questions, we'll reach out and make sure that your questions get answered. Actually, let us test drive the chat box a little bit. I know some of you have been using it. So if everybody can just kind of find the chat box on the bottom of your screen and type in the response to the following question. Okay, what was your favorite item in the gift box you received from us? And if you say bourbon, you did not get the right box, or perhaps you did. So please use the chat box, open the chat box, and keep it open so that later on you can also I am gonna go look at the chat box. Yeah, somebody will have not opened it yet, but a lot of salamis. Hope you enjoy all the goodies in there. Did anyone say notepad? That was our intent, so that you remember LACF as well as you enjoy your treats. So that's the chat box. And in the chat, on the chat box, you can see that there's a way for you to chat privately as well as with everyone. Feel free to put in your question. That's for everyone to see. If you prefer to chat privately with staff, you can use a drop-down box to find their names. For technical help, you can chat Hank Drew. So Hank is our, the person with the gear that you see. All right, so let's get started. Many of you know Adin. He was a board member before he became executive director in January. That means he barely sat down before our world got turned upside down. Fortunately for us, his success not be better suited to lead us through these dynamic times. For 20 years, he has helped mission-driven organizations define and execute their vision and strategy to bring about positive social change. I'm just amazed at Adin's ability to turn ideas and concepts into action so quickly, working closely with each staff member in bringing multiple stakeholders of our community together. So Adin, we're so grateful to have you. Please take it away.
Wonderful. Vivian, thank you so much for the kind words. Hey, Hank, actually, can you scroll back one slide? Let's leave it on my family for a second. Thank you, Hank. I know you mentioned Tennessee. I'll just truth in advertising. I'm actually in Taos, New Mexico. I've been here for 3 weeks and head back home tomorrow through Utah. It's been a wonderful break away from the Bay Area, and yet I miss being in the Bay Area. So a few words about me, just because, I did get a chance to meet many of the people on this webinar in person, maybe once, twice, but not on a regular basis. So a few words just real quickly about me, and then we'll dive in. So you see a picture of my family. This is pre-COVID when we all had haircuts, and we all looked somewhat groomed. Well, let's see. Hank, can you spotlight? And we'll go over there. Thank you. And hopefully, Dennis, you can actually see the presentation as well. A quick word about my family. We live in Mountain View. We moved here in 2007. We actually first lived in Los Altos and then ended up buying in Mountain View. I have 2 sons who are now in Mountain View High School. Both of them are in the Madrigals program, if you know that. My wife, Jennifer, who you can see in this picture, works within tech. And we have our dog, Theo, who likes to keep us busy and healthy. As Vivian mentioned, I first joined the foundation as a board member in 2018. I joined because I believed there was an opportunity for me to support an organization that was working locally and really wanted to be able to contribute. The opportunity to apply for the executive director position emerged literally about a year ago when Joe announced that he was going to depart. And I took some time to think about and contemplate whether or not I wanted to throw my hat into the ring. But the same motivation that led me to join the board was the same reasons why I wanted to be considered for the role. I wanted to support an organization working locally that was making a difference. But I also recognized the tremendous potential for the organization to grow in how it was actually running its programs, engaging the community, engaging its donors, to do more and really to have a much greater impact locally. The elements, really the core elements of investing with purpose, in essence, in our communities. And truth be told, I believe that and still believe that I can make a difference in this leadership role. So Hank, next slide, please. I'm assuming the next slide will come. And if not, I will walk you through what will be our agenda.
Yeah, the slide's up.
So I don't actually have control of the bar, but there we go. Great. Thanks, Hank. Sorry?
We've got it.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. So, thank you. So the agenda is broken into 3 parts. I'm sort of going to walk you through a storyline, talk a little bit about what we plan to do, really in essence, before the pandemic started. what we did instead, and what's coming up next. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me in this conversation.
So we have a backup of Adin's phone, so if he's frozen up, he may pop back on his phone.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump.
All right, so we'll go on forward. This is the joys of technology in New Mexico. So anyway, normally we would be all together and I would be able to share this story perhaps in person. Unfortunately, I mean, the circumstances don't allow us to do that. That's our current reality. But I do want to take a moment to thank you for being here, and thank you for your support and your donations and your personal interest really in how the foundation actually achieves its agenda. So let me talk about what we have planned to do. Go ahead, Hank, next slide, please. One more. And one more. There we go. So I started in the role January 20th. I had a nice week of transition with Joe, and then we jumped into the work. And the team you see here pictured, which some of you know, I hope most of you know, and I started focusing actually, frankly, on our strategic plan, which is what we had adopted last year and what we had focused on intentionally on trying to implement. And that plan really focused on creating positive community change, collaborations for good in our community, giving locally and creating local impact. There was a seminal moment as I started in the role, and that happened on March 9th. It was a Monday. I remember this day, and I cherish this day. My staff and I, we ended up having a full-on day retreat where we really focused on the organizational values and the vision that we had for this institution as we were going to embrace the strategic plan and as we were going to focus in on the activities that we really wanted to prioritize. I share this because the things that we highlighted for us as an organization were things that were key. We wanted to be a dynamic organization, one that was inclusive, one that really built on its trust and reputation, one that was effective in touching our communities and serving the needs of our local communities. Next slide, please. And then, you know, now for something completely different. Next slide. So that was our plan. What happened instead was we ended up with a pandemic arriving on our shores. And next slide, go ahead, Hank. Well, things started to change for us, and I'll hold off on the animations if you don't mind, Hank.
Oh, sure.
Things changed for us significantly the next day. It was March 10th, again, a Tuesday, and it was very clear that things were going to get very, very dire in our local communities. And it was very clear that we needed to adjust our focus in some ways and do so significantly. In looking at what we were going to do, it was clear that we actually needed to build on the lessons of philanthropy from 2008 and really adopt those lessons in a different way. If you recall the Great Recession in 2008, there was a lot of pain in our communities, a lot of hurt from the nonprofits, a lot of hurt by residents. And what philanthropy did as a whole was try to tackle it, but in many ways there were also pockets of philanthropies and individual donors who felt that it was not the right moment to actually invest in our communities and to make impact. And so many of them, felt that there was this persistent fear that by spending money more than they would normally would want to do, that they would actually harm their endowments, let's say. I believe that was the wrong conclusion then. I believe that was the wrong conclusion back in March. And the conclusion that my staff and I, the team and I recognized is that we actually needed to make a real concerted effort to actually deploy resources now to support our communities in need. And that we really need to turn, in essence, to turn into the storm for our community residents, our nonprofits, and small businesses that we're going to be hurting and we're already hurting. In essence, we need to invest in purpose in our community. Our first effort, and now go ahead, Hank, was to launch the Nonprofit Relief Fund. And I want to do a real quick shout out to our funding partners, Housing Simons, Morgan Family Foundation. I will tell you the first organization I reached out to was Housing Simons, because they were very early out with a relief fund. And I asked, in essence, could I redeploy funds that they had given the foundation for the same kind of purpose? And their response, Holly, thank you, was immediate. Go ahead, please do this. This is important work. And so we started building our nonprofit relief fund. You people here at this webinar started supporting that nonprofit relief fund and helping us build the resources to grant dollars out to the community. Within a short time, we managed to issue their first round of grants for $100,000. Go ahead, Hank. You'll see that by April, with this sort of brandy rose-colored bubble, we started working on our Mountain View funds and starting to build partnerships with the city of Mountain View and Google. Those funds really focused on two communities, the renter community in Mountain View and the small business community in Mountain View. Collectively, we have raised and distributed or in process of distributing $650,000 from both corporations, donors, and foundations. And then move on, Hank. We then built off of the Nonprofit Relief Fund with our second round of funding and released another $100,000 for grants in the May timeframe. And then the following month, go ahead, Hank. And working in partnership with the Los Altos Chamber of Commerce and the City of Los Altos, we put together a fund to support the small businesses in Los Altos. The foundation itself collected $88,000, which was then submitted to the City of Los Altos to support the small businesses that had applied for support. I'm delighted to say that every organization, every business that applied for support that qualified for a grant from the City of Los Altos received funding. And that's a real, I mean, in essence, a testament to those of you who participated in that and contributed to those efforts. And the last thing that we're working on is sort of moving forward from there. I mean, the Nonprofit Relief Fund, go ahead, Hank, at this point actually has additional funds in it to be able to support another round of funding that we'll issue starting in August. And then we're contemplating and anticipate that we'll actually run a fourth round of grants in the fall to support our nonprofit organizations. Altogether, the foundation, since March, basically March 10th, and then publicly going out for a call for action on March 12th, has raised and distributed on the order of $1.1 million. And that is an amazing figure and an amazing testament to your collective ability to come together and really focus on the impact for our local community. Hank, if you don't mind, let's move to the next slide, but also pause, if you don't mind.
Yeah, if I may start to remind everyone to use the chat box for questions if you have that. I do have a question related to what you were saying. So if we could go back to the previous slide. I do recall, how our world has changed so much so quickly that back in March, we were all just trying to figure out which side is up. And it looks like from here, by March and early mid-April, two deployments had already happened very quickly. How were you able to, I mean, these are new things, right? I assume. And how were you able to deploy funds so quickly, and how did you decide who who would receive these funds?
Great questions, Vivian. I think the first thing that we recognize as a team is that there are nonprofit organizations that we support, and they're direct recipients of support. So the people in our communities and the residents that they actually service directly. Those organizations were really being affected by the pandemic, and that they needed resources. And the same way that we expected that organizations would all face fundraising gaps, their situations were such that they would not only face fundraising gaps, but also increased demands on their services. The team was great. The ones that you saw in the picture, we all reached out to different organizations to validate in essence, our theory. Got very quick confirmations from nonprofit organizations that there was an immediate need and we're able to really, again, to use funds exactly for that purpose and to issue that out. That allowed us to really disseminate resources quickly and to build off of that, and to continue to work with the organizations on ongoing kind of needs. I know that there was one question that popped up real quickly in chat, and to me, I will real quickly answer it. The question was, where's the list of the organizations that we supported? And we actually have it on our response fund part of our webpage. So if you actually go there, you can see the list of organizations we funded, both in the nonprofit relief fund for the first round and the second round. The question around Mountain View is a little bit different, Vivian. You know, that one was actually, we were in a position for the Google, which was the private at that point corporation which didn't want to be named, and the city to reach out to us, and frankly to Kathy, and to explore with us whether or not we would be able to support what they were trying to do. And we ended up getting into a very interesting sort of process to actually identify what's the best way to support small businesses, because that's technically complicated for philanthropies to do. And what I proposed to them was, in the end, what they adopted for small businesses was a microfinance loan program. So the end recipient of dollars raised for that process is a nonprofit organization. It's based in Oakland. It's been in operation for 40 years. It issues microfinance loans for small businesses and other types of businesses. That's its, you know, in essence, its approach. We were given an entree into it. We learned that they were also the partner for the city of San Francisco for the same concept, for the same ideas, which helped validate what we were thinking of. And they became our partner in this. And what's really noteworthy is that the funds that are being issued as loans to small businesses, once they're actually paid back over, you know, a course of years, those funds can only be used again by that organization to provide loans to small businesses in Mountain View. So we set up a repeated cycle to support small businesses in the community. And we kept building from there. The opportunity around the grants themselves were very targeted. The City of Mountain View specifically looked at CSA, Community Services Agency, as its recipient for dollars to support the rental community. We put our funds into that kind of approach as well. Wow,
that's a lot of action in just a matter of few weeks. Can these be turned into ongoing programs? So is the Mountain View funds now, as you said, is ongoing. Are all of these eventually going to turn into permanent programs?
I think look, I think and I might, you know, get ahead of myself a little bit in the presentation, but I think the expectation around supporting the nonprofit organizations through a kind of relief approach, I think that's our immediate and short-term kind of horizon. We're going to be doing that for a while. I think the opportunity to work with small businesses, I think we'll continue to explore how we can do that. You know, we're consistently looking at what makes for a strong community. What can we do to maintain the vitality of our community? And so many aspects of that are not only our nonprofits, but also our small businesses, the residents that really require assistance and support. And we need to continue to find ways to be able to provide that kind of support. So I do think that this is possibly a roadmap for how we work forward. Certainly as other issues come to the forefront as well. Things that we can replicate as we move, you know, through time, in essence.
Thanks. I don't see any questions so far, so let's continue.
Fantastic. Hank, if you don't mind, the next slide, please. So I want to explain a little bit of our thinking, and this ties a little bit to what Vivian was asking me. One of the things that we understood immediately was that this disaster is unlike any other disaster we've ever seen. Most disasters, this comes directly, by the way, it's a graphic directly from FEMA, follow a very linear path. And it's such that you can actually understand what that path is and prepare for it. You have the, you know, so in California, we expect earthquakes. We have earthquake preparedness and mitigation. We might experience an earthquake. Then we have the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, and we might have some immediate response and relief and activities around that. And then there's going to be the intermediate phase where we're actually starting to focus on recovery. And then there's really the long-term rebuilding and mitigation efforts, and sort of the cycle repeats. And I have to say this, most philanthropies and donors actually forget about that long-term, that months to years later time frame, simply because the urgency of the issues disappears and dissipates. But if you go, for instance, to hurricane devastated areas like Haiti or Puerto Rico, you can see devastation is still there years later and still needs support. Next slide, Hank, please. However, so this pandemic is not that kind of disaster. I pulled this slide actually April 15th, our original tax date. It came from Morgan Stanley. This is what Morgan Stanley thought this would look like. And what, frankly, many of us thought this would look like. We anticipated that we would have a peak, we would address the peak, we would come out of it. In essence, we would come into that kind of intermediate kind of recovery phase, and then we would start looking at long-term rebuilding and things will go back to normal. I mean, there's even the thought that we might have a second wave, but we would be able to handle that. Go ahead, Hank, first animation. Our peak case, that has not happened. Right, we're still going up. I think we hit a milestone today that was really truly unfortunate. Second animation, please. We expected we all would be back at work. I think the reality of that is that's highly unlikely, certainly through the rest of the calendar year for many organizations, and that changes the dynamic of what we're looking at. And this is our understanding when we started building our response funds, was that we didn't anticipate that this actually would be the path that recovery would look like. We anticipated that this pandemic would not play out in a linear path, that it would actually be very non-linear, that we would go from response into immediate relief, into somewhat of a recovery, and then back into the response into relief, and then possibly into recovery. And eventually we would enter into that rebuilding and frankly reimagining phase. So this, Vivian, gets a little bit back into your question of like, what can we do? And I do anticipate that we'll keep going back and forth between trying to rebuild and at the same time doing some emergency response. Next slide, please, Hank. So I'm now entering sort of the last stage of this discussion. So what's coming next, in essence? And I think, Hank, go ahead. One more step forward. Thank you. So what's next? I think if you follow the news, I think you can find that it's pretty dire in many circumstances. And I certainly think that our fall and winter seasons are going to will truly challenge us as communities. Not only do we have this deadly health pandemic now sort of ravaging our communities, we have a very long overdue moment around systemic racism, racial injustice, and inequities that we need to address. We have an economic recession that's now affecting us, tremendous job loss, and frankly, a lack of civil political discourse that's probably only going to get amplified through the next few months and into, I suspect, whatever inauguration date we end up having. There's a few things that are really looming in some sense. We have an eviction time bomb that potentially is about to go off. That's certainly going to affect many of those who are in our rental community. We have a nonprofit sector that in some cases are seeing this as an extinction level event, and I cannot stress that enough. There are some surveys that I've been studying that attest to the expectation that 11 to 38% of nonprofits will end up ceasing to operate altogether. And I just want you to imagine what that would do to our communities and the role that they play in our communities. And the forecast for small businesses is no less rosy. It's as equally as dire, and in many circumstances could be worse. So Hank, last slide, please. So I say this all because this is the honest, unvarnished truth. We are in this journey together. We have a tremendous interest in supporting our communities. We have a tremendous interest in ensuring that our communities remain vital. and thriving. You collectively stepped up to respond in our time of need, our community need, and to invest in our communities. And yet we have a lot of work ahead of us. I expect that the foundation is going to continue to work to be as nimble and as proactive a funder as possible. We will do all of in our power to ensure that we have and maintain a strong nonprofit sector that can weather these storms, that can continue to support our community members, and that continue, frankly, to maintain the vitality of our communities as well. I encourage you to work with us and to journey with us in this effort. Please continue to give if you can, support our community efforts if you can, support the foundation if you can, and I hope certainly that you can invest along with us in sort of maintaining our focus on strengthening our communities, really with the intentionality of really driving purpose in our communities as well. Those are my concluding remarks. Vivian, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Adin. We do have a question from Mike. Let me ask that question first, and then as a reminder, please feel free to continue to send your questions. As vaccines roll out, is there a role that LACF can play to collaborate with El Camino Health, HAMP, or Kaiser to help our community get vaccinated?
That's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer to that because I would have to explore that with them. But what I think I'm happy to explore it. I think that's a really interesting kind of question. I think more than anything else, what we can do is help advertise that there are opportunities to get the vaccinations at those medical locations, and that people in our community should actually go ahead and try to seek those out.
Let me ask a question that I'm guessing some of us will have on our minds. The fact that we're all here on the Zoom means that we are community members who care and want to donate. And I'm also guessing a lot of us feel the urge to push ourselves this year to do more. How could the community foundation support us as donors? That's one, I guess, in community that, like you said before, and continue with the program, and how can we support the foundation? Secondly, I can imagine donors are not so or just only focused on local communities. We all have other areas we would want to support and make sure that they are okay. Can the community foundation support donors from what we want to do even beyond our own local communities? Basically, as a donor service, is LACF here available to us?
So I think the short answer, yes. And Hank, I moved over to the computer. Hopefully that sticks. So there's two-part questions, and it's early. Let me take them one at a time. I think as an organization that is so tied to what the community's needs are and really in touch with the community. And again, I sort of point back to the fact that, when the Mountain View relationship developed, it was the mayor of Mountain View reaching out to one of our staff members, which really speaks to how tied we are to the community and how tied we are to sort of the nonprofit sector as well. If there are questions from our donors or potential donors about where they can align resources, we're there to help them navigate that. I think the key relationship that we provide is that we want to be part of that journey with our donors and really helping them understand where can you make a difference, where can you really invest alongside us with purpose in our communities, what can you do to actually really, in essence, bring you both satisfaction that you actually feel that you can make a difference and really see that tangibly play out. I think there's the second kind of facet, and this is a little bit beyond that. We focus so much locally, but we also have an effort to, and we can support people who are looking beyond the locations that we support. And I say this because we've fallen into a network. So for instance, to put a hypothetical out, if you're interested in serving an organization, supporting an organization in Morgan Hills, I can put you in touch with the foundation in Morgan Hills, or similar. If you want to do something in, you know, the East Bay, we can do that. I mean, Julie's here, the two Julies are here from Fremont Bank. We can talk to, you know, them about what they see in Fremont, for instance, and beyond and beyond. The network is really solid. We can look at supporting you not only regionally, but on the state level and the national level, frankly, even beyond. Did I answer your second question? And if I apologize, I didn't, would you mind restating it?
No, that's perfectly fine. I think that covers what I wanted to know. Let's see. I see that Dennis is saying there will be testing in Los Altos at the Los Altos Youth Center on August 13th and September 10th. So that's very good information for everybody to know if you're looking for that information. Let me see. Maybe somebody help me out if I'm missing some questions. Oh,
So Shabana has a question. If you don't want to.
Shabana, would you like? Let me see. Yeah. Shabana has a question about El Camino Healthcare District also has free testing, or is a comment. So there's a lot of, sounds like, you know, the pandemic is still here with us, and the role of LACF with the backdrop of a pandemic is on our minds. So I will say something, because sometimes we all think individually as what we can do, but LACF really is here to support us as a community, and that's how the Mountain View Fund came about, is somebody reaching out to LACF. So if I could just make one reaching out to LACF to ideas you share, out box, in the box, bigger box, all are welcome. So and that's how things get started. Let's see. Oh, Shabana there's a lot of buzz about Half My DAF. Yes. So Adin, would you like to talk about Half My DAF?
I love to. So let me start off by explaining Half My DAF, and then we'll go on from there. And then I want to circle back to this question around testing for a second. Half My DAF is a movement that came up from a donor couple in San Francisco. They challenged members in the philanthropic community that have donor advised funds to spend 50% of what assets they have in their donor advised funds in this moment now. And you'll find that there's a lot of support and advocates for that. There is, you know, the general premise, the general thought that this is the rainy day that philanthropy has been waiting for, in essence, holding its money in reserve for, that this is the moment to go ahead and actually spend those resources. So that Half the DAF is a campaign. There's other campaigns that are similar kind of in style. They're actually looking at, you know, again, encouraging members who have donor advised funds, philanthropists who have donor advised funds, to actually contribute, to put more of their resources into play at this point. I think there's a lot of validity to that perspective. There's, in essence, some pushback around what donor advised fund holders do and don't do with their funds. There's some pushback right now. If any of you track legislation in California, you can see there's a real effort to actually encourage more donor advised contributions to emerge. So I think there's something to be said about this movement and some others as well. I will tell you that I'll finish the comment that, you know, foundations like us, other foundations, are certainly encouraging their own advised funds holders to look at this moment and say this is the right moment for increased giving. There's been a lot of chat. I'm sort of looking at it around sort of the testing and so on. I think there is great resources. I think your point, I think it came from Mike, that there's an opportunity to advertise what's happening on testing. Certainly, I think that's something that we can look at and see how we can support getting out the word. I'm actually going to pivot off of that for a second and say that in some sense, the almost equally important issue that we are right now not necessarily addressing or promoting is actually the census, which seems kind of non sequitur, but this has a direct bearing on services that are provided financially from the federal government to localities based on the actual number of people who live there. And this is such an unusual moment to actually conduct a census. And so there are organizations, foundations that are promoting census counting, really, in order to make sure that future resources still come to their communities and don't get dispersed somewhere else.
Wonderful. I'm taking a look at a time and trying to be mindful as well of everyone's time. LACF staff and board members will definitely hang out even after the chat is over or the official Zoom call is over to answer questions, just have a conversation. But I do want to take this time and thank everyone for taking your time, sharing that with us, and letting us share with you what's been important for the Community Foundation as a way that we channel your generosity. So I'm going to actually just kind of turn the time over back to Laurel and then talk about the survey and other things. Please do keep in touch with us. Thank you everyone for your attention and sticking around. And now I think we're going to hear about the $500 grant drawing and survey.
Hi, have I been unmuted? I hope.
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, thank you everyone for hanging in there through the webinar, and we would love to get your feedback. This is obviously our first in a series of community conversations, so we would love to hear from you, our most loyal supporters, what went well and what suggestions you would have going forward for the future. And we welcome all your ideas. We'll be sending you, there's a link to the survey actually in the chat. And we will also be sending you an email with a link to the survey. Everyone who enters the survey or completes the survey, everyone will be entered into a drawing for a $500 grant. And the winner of that drawing may give that $500 grant to any local nonprofit of their choice. And you'll be notified on Tuesday. And let's see what else. So please feel free to hang around. I believe Hank is going to unmute us all so that everyone can chat amongst themselves, throw out questions, and just try to catch up as best we can and kind of pretend we're really all together. It's not quite the solstice at home in our home offices or living rooms, but I can't tell you how happy it makes me to see all your faces here. It really feels good to be together again. So thank you again so much for attending. We're really grateful to all of you for your support in every way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurel. Hey, real quickly, before everybody jumps in, I just want to thank the staff. They were tremendous, super supportive, truly invested in making sure that this works. And there's a tremendous amount of work that happened behind the scenes. So I want to applaud them for all their contributions and support. And I want to thank Vivian for stepping forward and helping us navigate this as well.
My pleasure. All right, so I think this is just like the end of any other party. We're going to try to mingle and talk about what's relevant. We actually could potentially just stay on point of the last note, which is about testing and community health, if that's something that everyone wants to stick around and start talking about. I know this is, with a big group, it's a little awkward, but would someone like to start and maybe ask a question? And you can unmute yourself.
I'll start off because I went and got tested again at El Camino on Monday. And the state changed the testing protocols last Friday because there's such a heavy demand for testing and the labs are overwhelmed. So they've gone from, we need to test everybody, to we can't test everybody, so they've really started a priority again. The hospital's really trying to work hard to test, but it's one of those things that I think most people, even the doctors now, are only being tested once a month at the hospital, so on a routine basis. So,
Wow.
I saw something on TV where, this is Barbara, that a doctor who was doing surgery somewhere in the world couldn't get his patient tested because there weren't enough testing capability in that hospital. So I feel like if we feel healthy and we don't have symptoms, we should decline the test. I know it's just my personal opinion, but I think that's kind of a priority out there. It's interesting. But before I go, I do want to do a little toast to everybody who put this together and to President and whoever actually delivered the boxes to our doorstep. That was very nice. So thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers. And the deliverers were the wonderful kids from the E3 Youth Philanthropy Program.
Oh, how wonderful.
Shout out to them. Thanks for bringing
Great.
that up.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank them.